So since I was recently able to finally gain access to a PlayStation 5, I treated myself to playing through both of Insomniac's Spider-Man 1 and Spider-Man 2, and I'd be lying to say if my obsession with those games wasn't a decent part of why I haven't uploaded too many videos recently. Sometimes you just gotta relax and do a little bit of gaming. With that aside, it not only reminded me of why I love Spider-Man so much, but gave me a hankering to rewatch the Sam Raimi Spider-Man trilogy starring, of course, Tobey Maguire. Even before I fell in love with Sam Raimi as a director through his iconic Evil Dead trilogy and Drag Me to Hell, there was a young former film student who would endlessly rewatch his DVD copy of Raimi's original Spider-Man film from 2002. As a kid, before I knew what good cinematography or good editing was, before I could tell a bad performance from a good one, or could recognize how goofy Willem Dafoe's Green Goblin Power Ranger looking suit was, I absolutely adored the film. Same goes for Spider-Man 2, released just 2 years later in 2004, and would feature Alfred Molina as the infamous Doc Ock. The film improved on the original in nearly every way: better action, better effects, and a more concise and powerful story. And even though adult me can recognize all the flaws in Spider-Man 3, whether it be the awful casting of Topher Grace or the weird and off-putting dance sequences, again, kid me loved the film. I loved Sandman, I took no issue with them retconning Uncle Ben's killer, and yes, I even loved Venom. I loved these films, all of them, and combined with playing Spider-Man on PS1 and the animated cartoon series, I was, like most kids, a massive fan of the web slinger. But years later, whether I'm dumping countless hours into Insomniac's Spider-Man games, I find myself returning to these films often, even despite being a little superheroed out with the influx of films and shows released between Marvel, DC, and competing companies. I still am never not in the mood to watch Raimi's trilogy. I always thought it to be nostalgia as the root of my infatuation with these films. I've already mentioned the special place in my heart that the films hold, but in the past few years I thought maybe it was my admiration for Sam Raimi as a filmmaker, my love for the craft and art of filmmaking, the personality and the visuals, the style, the comedy, and the artistry that Sam Raimi brought to the films, a trait that isn't exactly present in a lot of MCU films. However, upon my recent viewings, I figured out why I still find these films so desirable even in today's oversaturated landscape of superhero content, even a lot of which I do still love. The reason not even being a real massive revelation to anyone who's a fan of the character, but it feels like I finally understand my love for these specific films. Let's look quickly at the other two live-action adaptations we've received to get a bit of context. Don't worry, it'll all come full circle. The first being Andrew Garfield's version of the character. Now, I won't lie, I am not a big fan of either Amazing Spider-Man films. They have their fair share of solid moments, but overall I find the first film to be a bit boring and the second to be just a complete misfire with a really messy script. However, a lot of people still really enjoy Andrew's take on the character of Peter Parker slash Spider-Man. Personally, my biggest issue with his portrayal of the character and why I'm not exactly a big fan despite thinking Garfield is an extremely talented actor is that the character is both way too cool and attractive and has a complicated backstory that diminishes the character. Yes, I know it sounds like a nitpick, but Andrew Garfield is not only an extremely attractive person, but the character is written as this skater punk who isn't really all that nerdy, to the lengths that he needs to YouTube a video on batteries and leaves a calculator with his identity taped to it. On top of that, they overcomplicate his backstory involving his parents being CIA agents and his blood having a strong link to the spider that bit him, implying that Peter's blood is unique and he was almost destined to become Spider-Man. So what was once a character that was bitten by luck and used the powers for good, now was always meant to become that person. Moving on from Garfield, we have Tom Holland, our current iteration. Now this is a little more difficult because I do love Tom's interpretation of the character. However, the MCU had the difficulty of introducing a very prominent and popular character into a world that had been developed for over 8 years at that point and had a multitude of characters already developed. So they wrote around this by having his first film be less of an origin story, with him already being Spider-Man after being recruited in Civil War by Tony Stark, and having Iron Man operating as the Uncle Ben figure. This Peter did lose his uncle already, but right off the bat, after only being Spider-Man for 6 months, he was gifted Tony Stark as his mentor, Given an upgraded high-tech suit, fought Captain America, and seemingly didn't have too bad of an upbringing. His school he attends is seemingly pretty nice, even going on a field trip to DC for a science competition. He has very little if any trouble with his crush in terms of flirting, and while being nerdy and charming, doesn't really give off that geek vibe that gets bullied. They attempt to have Flash bully him a little bit in Homecoming, however they clearly ditched that element in following sequels, presumably because they saw it didn't really fit. This version of Spider-Man clearly has a lot more going on in terms of grand scale storytelling, having already fought Thanos in space, as mentioned in No Way Home, and while I have enjoyed all three MCU Spider-Man films, I don't get that same desire to return to them in the way I do Raimi's trilogy. And if you've been following along, you can see where I'm going with this. There is no other on-screen superhero who is as relatable as Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man. Garfield's Peter is handsome and charming with great hair and skates around in a cool fashion. Tom Holland's is nerdy but still quite good looking and charming and has a billionaire as his mentor. Tobey Maguire is about as average looking as they come and has the social skills of someone who's never had a conversation with another person.
I'm different. Punch me, I bleed.
Now, a part of this is due to Raimi's intentionally cheesy dialogue, but it just adds so much to the character. He says weird and dumb things. He fumbles over his words in a cringe-inducing fashion. He's awkward. He's goofy. His attempts at humor are so mistimed and poorly conceived that occasionally you see why he does get bullied. He doesn't have a Tony Stark to help him build things, or if he was ever really in a bad financial spot, could just swoop in and help out. He makes his own suit with no tech. He struggles to balance his personal life, his academics, his job, and his role as Spider-Man. He struggles with rent like a normal person and is constantly facing eviction. He gets fired from his job because of his duties as a superhero. He struggles to get the girl and watches from afar wishing he could be somebody else. He experiences loss and grief and takes on the unbearable weight of having to push through it all because he can do things nobody else can. In the MCU, whenever Peter is having trouble, he has someone like Tony or Aunt May to console or advise him. He even has Happy Hogan in his corner as well. When Maguire's Peter confesses he's responsible for Uncle Ben's death, he's not given any words of consolement. He's not comforted. Aunt May just silently walks away, leaving Peter with his guilt and grief. Maguire's Peter suffers, he struggles, and more importantly, he fails. He fails to save his best friend's father. He fails to save his best friend. He fails to save his mentor. But he keeps getting back up. He keeps on fighting. The reason myself and others still love Maguire's Spider-Man and why we constantly return to these films is because at the end of the day, I'm never going to be Iron Man with billions of dollars or a genius scientific mind. I'll never be Thor, a Nordic god from space gifted with the power of thunder. We love Maguire's Spider-Man not only because we can relate on a surface level, but because we see ourselves in him. We see ourselves fumbling over our words because we struggle with confidence. We see ourselves in Peter's quiet moments of reflection and grief because they remind us of our own experiences. He's a down-on-his-luck man gifted with incredible powers and sacrifices anything and everything to be the hero people need him to be. We not only see the awkward and cringy moments of Peter in ourselves, but we see someone who pushes past that and inspires us that maybe we can be a hero in our own sort of way. We see someone who gets kicked down relentlessly and painfully and gets back up time and time again. That's why we love Maguire's Spider-Man. Well guys, thank you for watching. As always, if you liked the video, make sure to click the like button, subscribe if you want to hear more from me, and click the little bell notification button so you get notified when I post new content. And as always, I'll see you on the next video.